Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our TLTS research channel. And today we are so excited to have Professor Rodney Jones with us to talk about this extremely interesting and intriguing topic we have never in posthuman digital literacies and artificial intelligence. Now, Professor Rodney Jones is no stranger to us, and he's been my very good friend for the past 25 years. Yeah, going back to 1990s, and still remember going to Professor Ron Scollon's and Susie Scollon's homes and to have scotch and to have dinner. And all those dinner conversations, are part and parcel of our intellectual socialization that the scholars have given us. And we were so privileged, we are both benefited. And Professor Rodney Jones is now Professor of Sociolinguistics and also Head of Department of the English Language and Applied Linguistics at University of Reading in the United Kingdom. And today, we will have him with us first to present a brief 20-minute presentation, and we will open up to have questions from the floor. So feel free to type in your questions on the YouTube, on the comments, and we will look at it and put forward those questions to Professor Jones. And now, for those of us who are new to TLTS Research Channel, you can give us a like, subscribe to our channel. It's Translanguaging, Transsemioticizing Research Channel. And every month we will invite prestigious, internationally renowned, both established scholars and also emerging scholars to share with us current topics. Now, I would like Tsinghua to put up this notice, May 27, just 6 days from now, North American time, and May 28, which will be Asian time, European time, British time, we have this symposium called Multilingual Approaches to Assessment in Literacy and Education, which is kind of a breakthrough because assessment has always been very, very monolingual and monocultural. And so Tsinghua is putting up this website link, and its registration is free of charge. So do go to that. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Jones. Rodney, for your presentation with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angel. And thank you for the kind introduction. I have to say that I met Angel back in Hong Kong when I was still a master's student, and she was already an assistant professor in the department. And her work on translanguaging in Hong Kong classrooms, I think, was really the first real research that I became interested in applied linguistics. And it really inspired me. It showed me how interesting and also how socially important applied linguistics can be. And I still always recommend Angel's work to all students.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you very much for having me today. It's very kind of you. I know that some of you have also read some of my articles about algorithms and their relationship to language and language learning and literacy. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and I'm going to talk, I think, a bit more generally or a bit more widely around the topic of artificial intelligence and how we can talk about artificial intelligence in language classrooms, and try to think about some of the ways advanced digital technologies impact literacy, and kind of try to figure out what it means to be a literate posthuman. And so I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen? That's great. That's great. So When I talk about artificial intelligence, I'm not just referring to like futuristic robots that might someday run the world. I'm really talking about those kind of mostly ubiquitous forms of intelligence that run in the background of our everyday lives, insinuate themselves into almost everything we do, from searching for information on the web to photoshopping our selfie to driving our car. But to talk about artificial intelligence in a useful way, I think we first have to challenge the premises embedded in the term. The idea that some things are artificial and other things are natural, and the idea that there is this abstract, measurable thing called intelligence that exists apart from bodies, things, and relationships. So the title of my talk is actually inspired by two books that I like. We Have Never Been Modern by Bruno Latour, and How We Became Posthuman by Catherine Hales. I like them because they help me to challenge these premises. For Latour, the whole idea of being modern has to do with drawing boundaries between society and nature, between humans and things, between science and art, between this and that. But Latour says, if you look at the way we actually act, the way we actually live, these boundaries actually start to blur. Think, for instance, of the example Gregory Bateson gives of the blind man with the cane. Where does the man end and the cane begin? Where does the cane end and the ground begin? Can they really be separated? But being modern requires that we make distinctions between the man, the cane, and the world. That's the intelligent thing to do. It's part of how we define intelligence. When you think about it, it's a lot of what we do when we teach. We teach people to make distinctions, to understand the separateness of things rather than their unity. The second book is by Catherine Hales, who's a literary critic, but this isn't a book about literature. It's about the history of the whole idea of artificial intelligence. Focuses mostly on the cybernetics movement of the 1950s and 1960s that contributed so much to the development of modern computing. So the question Hales is trying to answer, she says, is how information lost its body. How we started to think about information as something that is separate from the world, in the same way we think of the stick as something separate from the blind man. This way of thinking about information and about intelligence, she says, has blinded us to the material, embodied nature of information. And I also thought of another book that I recently read, which actually is about AI in the sense of intelligent robots. It's a fiction. It's called Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's about a future world where children are genetically modified to be more intelligent. And instead of human friends, they have artificial friends, sophisticated AI. And so it's about the relationship between Clara, an artificial friend, and her owner, Josie, a genetically enhanced little girl. So the genius of this book is that the character you end up sympathizing with most, the one who seems most human, is Clara, the artificial intelligence. And it's not because she's so intelligent, but because unlike the ultra smart people in this future world, she's able to engage in hope and faith and other less intelligent kinds of emotions. And so the book leaves you wondering what it means to be human. So what I want to argue today is that our job as literacy teachers in the age of artificial intelligence might be mostly to get our students to wonder what it means to be human. When people talk about posthumanism, they mean lots of different things. So some people like Hales are focused mostly on technologies and how humans are merging with them. For others, it's more about nature, erasing that human-centered idea that Latour was talking about, that humans are any different from animals or plants or rocks. The best synthesis of all of these perspectives, I think, came from Donna Haraway in her classic essay, Simians, Cyborgs, and Women, The Reinventure of Nature, written all the way back in 1991, long before posthumanism became trendy. While Haraway doesn't use the term posthuman, she opens up debate around this concept by calling into question three key boundaries that have helped preserve the sanctity of the human as a self-contained being. Those between humans and animals, humans and machines, and the physical and the non-physical. For Haraway, such boundaries are no longer secure, if indeed they ever were, for they are now breached by an array of new hybrid creatures or cyborgs, creatures which are both organism and machine. For many, the most important thing about posthumanism, and I think this is true for Alistair Pennycock, is that it's a political project. It's a critique of humanism, which put humans at the center of the universe, which put humans in charge, leading, of course, to the environmental mess that we find ourselves in. For feminist posthumanists like Rosie Burdatti, it's a critique of Enlightenment ideas of individualism, autonomy, rationality, that have ended up defining humanity in exclusionary ways as white and male and Western. For others, however, there's something dangerously inhuman about these ideas. I mean, why should I care about plants and rocks when people in India are dying of COVID? It gets even worse when you start thinking about artificial intelligence and conjuring up dystopian predictions of machines replacing humans, a prediction that we certainly can't dismiss out of hand. Even intelligent people like Stephen Hawking, who is himself about as close as you get to a real-life cyborg, is worried, as is Stuart Russell, one of the world's leading experts in artificial intelligence, who in the last chapter of his seminal textbook on AI asks the question, what if we succeed? If we really are able to create intelligent machines, he says, this would alter the destiny of the human race. AI systems at this level of capability could threaten human autonomy, human freedom, and even human survival. But when we really engage with the core of posthumanist thinking, the idea that humans and machines and things are entangled, that you can't separate the blind man and his cane, it becomes clear that what makes things intelligent is not purely a matter of the things themselves, but of their relationship with humans. Intelligence is relational. What seems to us intelligent about artificial intelligence often comes from the way we interact with it. Take the Tamagotchi, those little virtual pets that engage their owners in feeding them, caring for them, cleaning up their shit. We may not think of a Tamagotchi as artificial intelligence, but it did employ the kind of cybernetic feedback loop, which is at the core of contemporary artificial intelligence. By responding to human actions, it created relationships between machine and human, which made owners feel like they really were taking care of a living thing. Or for that matter, take Eliza, a chatbot developed in the 1960s by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory to imitate the speech of a therapist by simply repeating back to people things that it told it. Eliza wasn't intelligent in the way deep learning algorithms of today are, but on a practical level, it didn't matter. Because when people talked to Eliza, she made them feel better. Weizenbaum writes, I was startled to see how quickly and how very deeply people conversing with Eliza became emotionally involved with the computer. Once my secretary, who had watched me work on the program for many months and therefore surely knew it to be merely a computer program, started conversing with it. After only a few interchanges with it, she asked me to leave the room. Or take an even more contemporary example, like the artificial Instagram influencer, Lil Makila, a computer-generated persona who purports to be a 19-year-old Brazilian-American girl from Los Angeles with 1.5 million followers. When Makila's account was hacked by another computer-generated persona, and she was outed, revealed as being not human, she responded in the same way her human fans might have reacted. She became self-reflective and even a little bit depressed. She posted, "I'm thinking about everything that has happened, and though this is scary for me to do, I know I owe you guys more honesty. In trying to realize my truth, I'm trying to learn my fiction. I want to feel confident in who I am and to do what I need to figure out what parts of myself I should and can hold on to. I'm not sure I can comfortably identify as a woman of color. Brown was a choice made by a corporation. Woman was an option on a computer screen." So from the point of view of her followers, Makila's honesty about her inhumanity is exactly what makes her so human. So how do we talk to our students about humanity in the age of artificial intelligence? I suppose the best way to start with is the traditional Enlightenment ideas of humanism, which, as it turns out, are also the core of traditional literacy teaching and traditional education in general. Explainability or rationality, agency, and autonomy. And it's really funny if you look at the literature on language teaching, right? These are the kinds of words that come up: how to make learners more autonomous, how to explain things to people. How does artificial intelligence change these ideas? What do we want to do about it? What parts of these ideas do we want to hold on to? What parts do we want to revise? The problem with explainability when it comes to AI is that even though we talk about machines thinking, they don't think the same way we do. We make inferences based on a limited amount of data to which we try to apply principles of logic. Machines make inference based on massive amounts of data that they treat probabilistically. Google Translate doesn't care about grammar, doesn't think in terms of syntax, thinks in terms of math, and translates things based on calculations about their similarity or difference to other phrases or sentences in its massive pool of big data. The problem is, it's impossible to explain how AI works in human terms, especially AI based on deep learning, which is figuring out how it works as it works. Modern AI systems are essentially black boxes. Data goes in one end, the answer comes out the other. It can be impossible to understand how the system reached its conclusion, even if you're a programmer looking at the code. In 2015, a research group fed an AI system called Deep Patient health and medical data from 700,000 people and tested whether it could predict diseases. It could, but Deep Patient provides no explanation for the basis of its diagnosis. And the researchers have no idea how it comes to its conclusion. A doctor either can trust or ignore the computer, but that trust will remain blind. While researchers are working on AA that can explain itself, there seems to be a trade-off between capability and explainability. Explanations are cognitive shorthand used by humans, suited for the way humans make decisions. Forcing an AI to produce explanations inevitably makes it less intelligent. With artificial intelligence, information is always processed at a higher scale than we produce it. Our like on Facebook is not processed on the level of us liking something, but on the level of billions of other likes and other data points that we might think, not think, have anything to do with us. The second problem is agency, which is really the idea that someone has to be in charge. That blind man needs to be in charge of the stick. But what if it's the other way around? Maybe the ground that the stick is touching is in charge of the stick. Maybe the stick is in charge of the man. Whenever we adopt a tool in order to gain agency over the world, we end up giving over some agency to the tool. It's inevitable. And this is even more dramatic when it comes to AI tools that we use to figure out where to go when we're lost, to schedule our time for us, and to help us figure out what we need when we search the web. The problem is deep learning AI is becoming better at lots of things than we are. And so we become more and more willing to surrender agency to it, to let it tell us where we should eat, who we should date, even how we're feeling. Already, computer programs can detect emotions on the basis of facial analysis. Soon, our mobile phones will be able to read our emotions, our reactions to situations, our feelings for those around us, our emotional profile, our health condition, and much more. Which brings us to the problem of autonomy. The idea that we are separate individuals, which inevitably becomes strained when we become part of networks, when our individuality becomes defined by our place in the network and our selfhood gets filtered by algorithms. Algorithms don't see us as individuals. They see us as collections of data points, and we're not much use outside the network. So I'm not saying that we should abandon these ideas of explainability and agency and autonomy, that we should throw the Enlightenment out the window. I'm just saying that these traditional pillars of literacy education need to be rethought if we're going to equip people to deal with artificial intelligence. You can't read an algorithm in the same way you read a book. And so I want to suggest 3 ways we might approach talking about artificial intelligence in the context of literacy classes: design thinking, folk algorithmics, and concept reengineering. With the work of multimodal analysts like Kress, the concept of design has already made its way into literacy classrooms. People speak less of writing or composing texts and more about designing them. I suggest we bring this same kind of thinking to our students' interaction with digital tools, not just in terms of the design of interfaces, but in terms of what the digital tools are designed to do, and more importantly, how they design us as users. One good place to start is with Stuart Russell's idea of human-compatible design. Russell argues that the problem with most AI is that it's designed to make humans compatible with it rather than the other way around. So students can start by asking how much their tools are compatible with them, and how much they are molding their behaviors to match their tools, and what the consequence of that is. Another way is by presenting design problems as real-world ethical problems, such as the problem of designing self-driving cars so they can make moral decisions, and whether or not we should try to program human ethics into machines. Finally, and this is something I mentioned in my AAAL talk, focusing on design glitches, like this algorithm that started to automatically produce t-shirts with inappropriate slogans. What were the design assumptions that caused this to happen? And what were the human assumptions? The second method, which I also mentioned in my AAAL talk, is folk algorithmics. As I said before, it's really hard to explain how AI and algorithms work, but we can explain how we as humans interact with and make inferences about how they work. So here I ask students to pick out algorithms that affect their daily lives and interview people. I even get them to make these little mini documentaries about it. Try to figure out how they interact with algorithms by asking questions like, how do you think the algorithm works? What kind of speaker or the hearer do you take the algorithm to be? How do algorithms affect your texts, your context? How is agency distributed? How do we make inferences about what the algorithm is doing? And how do we think the algorithm is making inferences about us? How do people try to work the algorithm? And how does the algorithm try to work the people or try to configure users? So the idea is not to reverse engineer the algorithm. It's more to reverse engineer people's inferential processes as they interact with the algorithm. Finally, there's the process of concept re-engineering. Students in an English class are not in the position to re-engineer AI, but they are in the position to re-engineer how they talk about it. Concept re-engineering is about students working together to create alternative imaginaries about technologies that better serve their interest. The idea comes from the digital ethicist Luciano Florodi and other contributors to a book called the On Life Manifesto. The dominance of negative projections about the future is often the signature of the inadequacy of our current conceptual toolbox, they write. The purpose of concept re-engineering is to acknowledge such inadequacy and explore alternative conceptualizations that may enable us to re-envisage the future with greater concept, with greater confidence. One concept that deserves re-engineering is the idea of intelligence itself, or at least the way we use the word smart to talk about phones, smartphones, to talk about speakers. We have a smart speaker, smart televisions, smart homes, smart cities. So students engage in collecting all of these instances of smart and trying to figure out what it means. How is it used? Smart for what? Smart for whom? Then they work together to reimagine how they would make a city or home smart. What sorts of ways might they employ technologies? And what ways might they avoid employing technologies? How would their own smartness end up being part of this smart place? The aim of these approaches is to help students to see the relational dimensions of AI, that they and their human ways of thinking are never separate from the assemblages of tools, systems, minds, and bodies that we end up referring to as artificial intelligence. It doesn't abandon the principles of humanism, but it does refashion them. Rather than trying to explain AI, it asks students to engage with how they experience it. And as they experience it, work and rework it. Rather than teaching them to control AI or telling them that AI is controlling them, helping them to see how this control is distributed and how they might play a part in redistributing agency, both by the way they use technologies and how they think and talk about them. And rather than teaching them that they are autonomous or need to be, helping them to see that they are, in Andy Clark's words, natural-born cyborgs. That is, it is precisely the ability to engage with tools that makes them human, which after all is also what Vygotsky said, isn't it? As McLuhan said, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us, but it doesn't end there. The cycle continues with us then reshaping our tools, and this reshaping is exactly the kind of work we need to be doing in literacy classrooms. Thank you. So that's my talk. I don't know if you would like me now to simply start to address some of the questions that you sent me, or if you would like to ask some other questions, or how would you like to handle it?
Yeah, Ronnie, why don't you start answering those questions sent to you first, and then we open up to the floor.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great. So the first question is from Phoebe, and Phoebe is asking about YouTube. And of course, it's a really popular platform, and she wants to know about how plurilingual and pluricultural teachers and students can use YouTube to develop critical digital social media literacy from the pragmatic web. And if schools provide multiple educational projects, platforms for co-developing students' heteroglassic sociocultural identities and literacies, such as inviting plurilingual, pluricultural students to design anchored dynamic infotainment, YouTube channels as children, teenagers, young adult YouTubers, any potential benefit, risk, challenges from YouTube. I think YouTube is great, Phoebe. Really a fabulous literacy tool because it engages students, of course, in so many different kinds of modalities and so many different kinds of participation frameworks as well. So you have, also the comments below and stuff like that. But there is something that I think is also quite relevant when it comes to kind of artificial intelligence and algorithms that we need to think about with YouTube, is how YouTube recommends videos to people and some of the consequences of this. In fact, recently there's been quite a lot about YouTube in the news because it's been found that the problem with algorithms is that they have goals, right? The programmer gives the algorithm a goal, and the algorithm tries to reach the goal. Doesn't matter how he does it, right? And so the goal for YouTube's algorithm is to get people to watch more YouTube videos, right? To keep people on the platform. And it figured out that the way to do this is to recommend to people more and more extremist, violent, terrible, hateful videos, right? And so that's what it did. And so more people started watching these videos, and YouTube, because of this algorithm, actually became a kind of platform for radicalizing people in various kinds of political ideologies. And so I think in this case, YouTube is actually also a really, really fascinating site for students to critically engage in the kinds of recommendations they're getting and why they're getting these recommendations and whose interest these recommendations are serving. Well, so from this perspective of teachers, systematic operational planning, YouTube other social media indicate interactions through complex nexus of practice among users, technologies, and sociocultural. That's exactly what I was saying. You're absolutely right about that. So it's not just about, I think you already are telling me that, isn't it? That it's not just about the images, the modalities, the languages, but it's also about the entire kind of system that YouTube is embedded in, which is also a kind of system of advertising and a system of engagement, and it's important also to engage in that. You also have a question about research methodologies for this kind of work. And I think that one of the things about doing literacy research in general, and I think that coming from probably the kind of tradition that you're coming from, particularly from Angel's work, I think that literacy education is not about cognition, it's about life. It's about seeing how people live life. Because you can't understand how people think unless you know how they live, because living comes before thinking. Yeah. So I think ethnographic methods are really very, very important. Unfortunately, and you talk about grant applications and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it's generally much harder to get grants with ethnographic work because funders tend to like really kind of very scientific sounding kinds of things. And so my suggestion, and something that I've done in the past, is I try to create a kind of a mixed method kind of approach where I invite someone else onto the project, maybe a computer scientist, maybe a biologist. I had one project where I had a biologist come in on the assignment with me, or other people who have a bit more of a quantitative paradigm, who can also offer that kind of perspective. It can be a very valuable perspective for me, but it, I think, also can be really, really useful in getting the grant, because they see that your grant is interdisciplinary, and then they can also see, oh, it has this kind of quantitative side to it. So that's just a little bit of kind of practical advice. Here's a question from Jason. Jason's interested in the whole idea of algorithm as authority. And he makes a really good point. He says he's working in critical media literacy studies, and students say when they're not sure about a topic, they just Google it, right? They read news from social media. They don't read much about the actual news or news in newspapers. They don't trust it. They think that the best way to do it is just to kind of Google it. But Jason makes the point that what they're already doing is they're kind of giving over their critical faculties to the algorithm. They're letting the algorithm be critical for them. And they don't actually seem to be employing any of the credibility heuristics that you should employ when you're dealing with media text, because they feel, okay, I Googled it, and that should be enough. And that is a really good point, Jason. In fact, Dana Boyd has a very, very interesting piece. You can probably find it on the internet. It's called "Did Critical Media Studies Backfire?" And she makes the point that one of the things that we did in critical media studies was to teach people not to trust the news, right? And to teach people to, okay, instead of trusting what you read in the news, you should find out for yourself. So you go on the internet and find out yourself. And actually, it's probably a much better idea to believe what you read in, I don't know, the New York Times or any other big newspaper, than to go on YouTube and find out about all of the conspiracy theories about how you shouldn't take the vaccine, or COVID actually doesn't exist, or something like that. And so so this is the problem, that we have to rethink what we mean by critical media studies. In the past, it's always been about getting people to be critical of the texts. But what we really need to do is get people to be critical of the media, to get people to see how the media itself, how the technology itself is affecting the kind of information that they're getting. So that's a really great point, Jason. Bongi, is that how I say it? Bongi or Bongji? Bongi?
Bungi, yeah, Bungi.
Bongi, that's good. So this is Bongi, and Bongi says limited possibilities of how one can act upon the algorithmic world. And so again, this idea of agency. What are the opportunities for agency? And you mentioned the idea of sort of grammars of action, and I actually I want to also think about grammars of motive as well, because I did have that little diagram from Kenneth Burke up in my presentation. I didn't go too much into it, but Kenneth Burke was a kind of philosopher of rhetoric, and he wrote this book called The Grammar of Motives. And it really is about how we explain why we do things and why things happen. And he says when people talk about why things happen, they tend to, they don't always assign agency to themselves. In fact, they very rarely do. They usually don't say, I did this. They usually say, oh, well, this happened. I was walking on the street and suddenly this thing happened, right? And so they assign agency to the place or to somebody else or to the situation or to some action, or sometimes to themselves as well. And the kind of point that Burke is making there is that even in our minds, agency is not this kind of very simple kind of thing that I have the power to do action and I'm responsible to the action. It's really a kind of political, ethical exercise to understand how agency is distributed throughout situations and how it should be distributed around within situations. And when it's not distributed in the way you think it should be, to try to do a little bit of redistribution. So when it comes to algorithms, the algorithm does have a lot of control over what we can see, what we can do, but that doesn't mean that we don't have any control, right? We don't have to Google. We can use like DuckDuckGo, right? Yeah, I mean, we actually have all sorts of choices that we can engage in redistributing the agency around our technology use. And it doesn't mean, I mean, I think there's often this kind of black and white thing, like, oh, the algorithm is controlling you, your smartphone is controlling you, throw away your smartphone, quit Facebook, sort of thing. And it's the kind of, very extreme reaction. And I mean, I think throwing away your phone, by throwing away your smartphone, you're being just as controlled by your smartphone as not throwing it away, if you know what I mean. Right? And so the idea is to try to be more conscious about how you use your phone, how your phone tries to engage your attention. Yeah. Why do you look at your phone every 5 minutes to see if somebody liked your Instagram post, right? What is it about the technology that's creating these kinds of habits in you, right? And then to try to kind of redistribute that agency by using the technologies in different ways. Yeah. Could you please elaborate on the significance of digital media preparing it to non-digital times, right? Whether or not one is in the digital times or one is heavily using digital media, it doesn't seem the public surveillance still exists, possibly through print media.
Just elaborating on this, like coming from Korea, where I grew up in, I was born in the militarized regime in the 80s and 70s. When I was growing up, I saw soldiers and people fighting against the soldiers, and then the news were heavily controlled, and then the type of music that people listen are also heavily controlled. So I'm just thinking, well, it's a political governmentality that I was growing up, but how is it different in the AI? Because it's similar kinds of surveillance in my understanding, and so why is it so significant? So
yeah, very good. Really good question. Lots of ways to answer it. I mean, I think in a way it's not different. That and not just about surveillance, but about humans and tools in general. That the kinds of things we're thinking about when we're thinking about how we engage in AI is the same kind of Vygotskian framework as how to think about humans interacting with rocks in prehistoric times. And so this kind of human-tool relationship and the dynamics of mediation, right, that's a constant. And so it's not that oh, now we have digital media and everything is totally different. No, absolutely not. That it's, and in fact, it's quite dangerous, I think, to think that way. Because when you think that way, you cut yourself off from the history of tool use and history of mediation that can teach us so much about how we can better use digital tools. When it comes to surveillance, I mean, human social life is based on surveillance, right? That's how we got. That's how. Well, if you listen to some evolutionary linguists, that's how language developed as a way to gossip about people, as a surveillance tool, right? And so surveillance has always been like really central in the organization of human life and in the organization of governments, right? And so, there were spies and there's been government surveillance, all through history, with various kinds of regimes. I think that, are you signaling me, Angel?
No, I'm saying, sorry to cut, because regarding, we have a question from the YouTube audience, so regarding agency. So I just want to read you the question so that you, on agency. Maybe I can read it to you.
Let me just finish with Bongji's.
Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to finish with what she was saying.
Yeah.
The difference with digital tools, it's, I think, the change in materiality. So, during the 50s, during the Korean War, there was a lot of surveillance, but it was human surveillance. It was watching human bodies or looking at human inscriptions on pieces of paper, or even listening to human voices over the radio. But now to spy on people, you don't have to do that. That is, you don't have to have any language, you don't have to have any bodies, right? All you have to have is the kind of click stream that they create when they're on the computer, right? And so everything becomes data, right? Everything is preserved, in other words, right? There's nothing that's private anymore. And so I think that's the sort of special capability of digital technology. So sorry about that, Angel. So the question about agency.
Yeah, because it's really related to Bongji's earlier question about agency and distributed agency. So we have a question from Gahyun. Hi, Gahyun, you're there. Gahyun is also from Korea. Doing much on the YouTube. So Gahyun's question is, if agency is distributed and can be redistributed, how could we address the matter of responsibility? And then how can we teach students the responsibility for their actions if they say, my agency is distributed over the classroom?
That's a very good point. It's a very good point. I think that actually, and this gets back to Kenneth Burke, because that's exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about responsibility, how we assign responsibility. And to see that agency is distributed always means that you have a part in it. That's the point. That you can't distribute it away from you completely, yes, because you're always part of the network, right? You're part of the actor network, and you can't say I had nothing to do with this because you did. And so I think actually the idea of distributed agency is actually a way to make our students more responsible for their digital media use than they are, because they can't say, oh, it's all the algorithm made me do it. Or they can't say, oh, it's this horrible person on Instagram who doesn't like my pictures. It's all of them are joined together in this network, and what one does affects all the others. And so not only does distributed agency mean that you're responsible for yourself, It also means that you're responsible for the algorithm and the way the algorithm works, which is really true, isn't it? Because the way that algorithm works is by collecting data from all of your behavior. And so what the algorithm is actually doing is reflecting your own behavior back to you. And so you are ultimately responsible. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and then we have this very good comment from Kay Tumlet. I hope I have read your name correct. Kay Tumlet. When I work with certain tools, I'm happy to learn with and from the agency. So learn with and learn from the agency of the technological tools. Yeah. And then Olesia, also from Simon Fraser University, one of our research students there. Olesia, hi. Do you think that in the light of recent AI developments, the role of the teacher will gradually become obsolete?
Oh, no, I hope not. Well, this is, there are a lot of ways that AI has been engaged in teaching. So, for example, automatic essay evaluation is very popular now. In fact, the TOEFL examination is graded by an AI. It's not, the essay is graded by an AI. You look a bit shocked, sorry, but yeah, it's graded by an AI. They've been able to train these AIs, and they seem to have a high degree of accuracy when tested against human raters. So quite amazing. Does that mean that we don't need human raters? Well, I hope not, because I think that there are aspects of education that aren't about training, and this is what artificial intelligence is about. It's about being trained, and then it trains us back, sort of thing. But I think there's something about education that's different as well, that has to do with human relationships and inspiration and friendship and socialization and this sort of thing. So I don't think that AI will be able to do that. I think at the same time, there are also some very dangerous things that are happening around AI in education. Learning analytics, for example. A lot of universities are starting these learning analytics where all of the students, every single mark the student gets, is kind of fed into this AI, and then the AI starts to tell the student what they should do. Again, I think problems with this are that it promotes certain kind of assumptions about what learning is. Actually, it promotes the assumption that human beings are AIs, right? That we learn the way AIs do. That we just need to get the right input, and we'll have the right output. But I mean, my experience with my students is, I think, for example, with my PhD students, everyone is really different, and everyone needs a different kind of thing. Some people need to be talked to in a really harsh tone of voice, and some of them need a really gentle approach, and some of them need a lot of feedback, and some of them, well, you don't want to give them too much feedback, you just want to let them kind of get on with it. And it really is a very, very delicate kind of human relationship that I think it's so far, it's only something we can do. AI is taking over a lot of other jobs. I don't think
medical jobs, especially. Here, I'm turning about learning analytics. We do have a colleague in our YouTube audience. Hi, Gitter, colleague in learning sciences. Gitter has a question for you. Can you comment on the extent to which social and contextual aspects of human lives are attended to in AI development, and the effect of excluding or including the social perspectives in the process?
Well, this is, of course, the big the big puzzle for AI now is, and this is what they really mean by the pragmatic web, because the way humans understand language is not just about semantics, it's about context. And without the context, it really is very, very difficult. And so, even if Siri gets to know my voice really, really well, if Siri doesn't know what happened to me at the office today, then it's not going to understand when I say nasty things to her, right? And so what are they doing to try to solve that? I mean, I think quite a lot of sort of programs now are about trying to fill in these contextual aspects, these contextual information. So Google is quite good at it because it has all sorts of context. When you search for something, it actually can contextualize that in terms of, okay, where are you? What city are you in? So if you're, searching for Victoria in New Zealand, maybe you get Victoria University, right? If you're searching for Victoria in the UK, maybe you get Victoria's Secret. I don't know, right? So, I mean, it knows where you are, right? And it knows who you are as well, because it knows what you searched for in the past. And it's probably also read your emails. And so it knows, the kinds of things you've been talking about. So that is a kind of contextualization. Smartphones are also equipped with motion sensors, right? And so things like exercise programs can become very, very physically contextual. But a lot of the work in this kind of contextualization is in getting people to tell the AI to fill in that information for the AI. So doing things like checking in or saying how you feel or doing this or doing that, that becomes kind of gamified, right? So, and really when you think of social media, that's what social media is doing. It's trying to get people to fill in all of this context for the AI so that they know how to sell you stuff better. So, so it's happening.
Yeah, on that point, I think we really need to have a pragmatics introduction course to everybody.
Yeah.
Because context is not static.
Yeah.
In context, it's not, I can describe the context to the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
So the pragmatics means the context emerges. And it emerges in relation to our interpretations and other people's actions and reactions. And so it's basically, it's not like a container. The context is not a container. But then usually and get that I might be wrong, okay, you're there. Usually the learning sciences colleagues will think of context as being more or less stable, and you can describe it and you can design it. Whereas this emergent, this unpredictable feature of context and this the inferencing processes. But I want to, before you carry on answering questions, I think it's better for the human questioner to ask you questions, and I'll turn to Corey. Corey is our recent graduate from University of Hong Kong, our Dr. Huang.
Hi. Thank you, Rodney, for your inspiring talk. Sorry, I missed the first part of your talk, and it's great to see you again, although only virtually. So I have two questions. The first one, I attended a seminar series about digital citizenship hosted by HKU a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I think most of the scholars there, they're not discourse analysts or language researchers. They seem to have a very or relatively static view on digital citizenship. It's all about competence, and they have a lot of tables about what digital citizenship competence means. And one of the I think in one of the talks they mentioned Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. So I found this book the title is very interesting because, I think this is about the rhetoric. I'm not sure if you already talked about this, the rhetoric of
You seem to be breaking up, Cory.
separating the technology from the human.
Yeah, I think that's it. I like Sherry Turkle. I think she's very interesting and very smart. But I think that the premise of this book, there's something problematic about the premise of this book. The premise of this book is that when we are engaging with technology, that we're not engaging with people. And I think that any of you who have engaged in your smartphone know that's simply not true. In fact, when we're engaging with technology, we're always engaging with people. That's why we're engaging with technology, because we want to see who liked our Instagram photo, right? And I think what bothers her is, and I think what bothers a lot of people, is this idea of you go to a restaurant and you see a bunch of friends sitting around the table and they're all looking at their phones instead of talking to each other. And they think, oh, that's a terrible thing, isn't it? Because they're alone together, right? They're together, but they're actually separate. But I actually, a couple of years ago, or when I was still living in Hong Kong, I did a study of people taking pictures of food at restaurants, because at restaurants, people like to take pictures of the food, right? And I found that, sort of this idea of the smartphone in a restaurant. Smartphone is a really important thing in a restaurant. It's a very important social device that you use to collectively narrate about your meal with other people that you're dining with, and then share your meal with these other people that you're not dining with. And so, a lot of that time is spent also, looking at your phone to find out what other people said about what you're eating, and then maybe sharing that as well with the people that you're talking. So it may, from a distance, look like they're kind of alone together. But this is the great thing about ethnography, because if you actually go and sit with them and find out what they're doing, you realize that, no, this is really an intensely social kind of situation. And so I think there's a problem with that. I think, though, that what people who are talking about digital citizenship are worried about is etiquette, not citizenship, right? They're kind of old guys like me, and maybe they're at dinner at home and their daughter is playing with her phone, and they think that's impolite, right? Because they're talking to someone else rather than talking to me. And so, I think, and I fair enough, I think that, perhaps we need to engage in conversations about what is polite or what is impolite in different kinds of situations. But it's not about citizenship, and it's not about cognition. It's not about being alone or together. It's just about etiquette, really.
Yeah, so on that point, I'd like to invite Qinghua. After Qinghua, then Qinghua could also read April's question, which is also about this pragmatic and the text you wrote. Qinghua?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask one of my own questions first, if I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I ask because I've read the paper and I find out that Dr. Jones talked about the relationship, the kind of relationship between the viewer and also the algorithm and the user. And for me, I feel like on YouTube, we were given the choice of not saying some posts. We can have the active choice to say, I don't want to see videos like this. I don't want to see videos like that. So on one hand, by doing this, it seems that we are taking advantage of the algorithm to not giving contents that we don't like. But on the other hand, it's like the algorithm grows better because it's gaining even more concrete evidence. The algorithm doesn't have to guess what we like or not. The evidence is so solid. So I was wondering, is the kind of adversary relationship between like the tool and the user always exist? Is it like everlasting relationships between a user and a tool? Do you think so? That's my question.
Well, I don't know if I would say it's always an adversarial relationship, but I think it's always a tension. Yeah, that there's and this is what verse says as well, that there's always a tension between the tool and what the tool wants to do, and the human and what the human wants to do, and action arises out of that tension. And sometimes that tension can be very productive. It can be a good kind of tension. But when it comes to sort of explicitly trying to control the algorithm, you're not really controlling the algorithm. You're right. Because you don't even know how the algorithm is working. All you're doing is giving the algorithm more information, but you're just giving it in a more active way rather than an implicit way, in the way you're usually giving it. But that is very tricky, you're right, because it gives the illusion of control. And a lot of computer programs work this way. They give you a lot of preferences. So user preferences, right? And you can set all of these user preferences that actually makes you feel like, oh yeah, now I've personalized it. But often those preferences are actually ways, tricks for you to actually give more information about yourself to the internet companies. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can read because it's pertinent. The question from April. April, you're in the YouTube audience. But April says, in your book chapter, The Rise of the Pragmatic Web, Implications for Rethinking Meaning Interaction, Dr. Jones, you argue that many of the strategies that internet companies use to entice people into making information are based on carefully exploiting principles and conventions of analog pragmatics, such as the cooperative principle and expectations about the conditional relevance of sequential actions in communication. So April's question is, will some of the future pragmatics research, discourse analysis research, will lie in the collaboration of computer scientists and sociolinguists? And will the human-to-human interaction become so digitalized that theories of analog pragmatics become obsolete?
I'll just answer the last question first. I don't think so, because we'll continue to interact with humans. I hope so, anyway. But I mean, I think of that book I read about Clara and the sun. And so maybe in the future, things will be very different. But I do agree. I mean, actually, it's not so much computer programmers as UX designers, so user experience designers, who are very, very interesting because they study linguistics, and they study psychology in order to be able to design interfaces to get you to do what you want to do. So to get you to agree to give permission for the program to access your camera, right? To get you to agree to, subscribe one more month to for this app, right? So I mean, and they call these dark patterns. UX designers actually call these dark patterns as well. And there's a big kind of debate in UX circles about the ethics of this. And so I think it's actually really useful for sociolinguists and discourse analysts to engage with these kinds of professionals. Maybe not so much, well, I mean, definitely computer scientists as well, but actually professionals who are designing these things. And they're not all bad guys, you know, they're not all Mark Zuckerberg sort of thing. I mean, many of them are kind of asking the same questions that we're asking and you know, facing the same kind of dilemmas that we're facing. So I think that's a really productive conversation.
And there's this pertinent question from YouTube audience, Risa Shalisa. Thank you for your wonderful lecture. Do you use or do you focus on the notions of CDST? For example, iteration, co-adaptation, patriarchy in AI-related agency.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. What does CDST?
Yeah, I don't know. So maybe Risa, can you type in more information for us? For example, iteration, co-adaptation, patriarchy in AI-related agencies. So yeah, there's something I don't know either. So maybe Risa, you can type in more information.
Yeah, if you could let me know and maybe send me some references to that. That sounds like a really interesting framework.
Yeah,
I'd like to learn about.
Xinhua, you have other questions, or Corey, or other host?
I think just now.
I do.
Yeah, just now Corey has some connection issues, so maybe he can go on. Sorry.
Yeah, Corey, did you have some more to ask?
Yeah, hopefully my connection is stable now. Yes, I think my second question is related to some of the points that you already mentioned or other people mentioned. It's about giving away data, or I'm just wondering about the critical digital literacy education, how it can deal with the step of giving consent or the step of consenting. Every time I enter a website now, I'm asked about cookies, and I have no idea what those regulations or those statements mean exactly. So every time I just click accept all to just get rid of that step. But it seems to me that would become a very important step, because that would probably be the starting point for the operation of algorithms, because you are giving away a lot of data, your footsteps online. So yeah, what would be your comments on this step, the consenting step?
What you're experiencing is the result of a law called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union. And what this law requires is that whenever you collect any information from anybody, you need to have their active consent. That is, they need to click on something that says, I agree, before you can actually put your cookie up. Now, the idea is great, right? Because, people should have our consent. So theoretically, the idea is great. But practically, what this has resulted in now is every single website you go onto, before you can actually look at the website, this big thing that comes up, which says, do you consent to cookies? And then a button that says, I agree. And you click on the button. So what is the result of that? The result of it is that it's training people to click, I agree. Right? That clicking I agree actually now becomes automatic. Yeah. And so that means that you're actually not really giving consent because you're only clicking I agree to get rid of the banner so you can read the website. Right? That's all it is, isn't it? Right? So I think that law has really backfired. Right? I think that because it makes the assumption that sort of human beings are these rational, logical, legalistic animals that, when they get a contract, they'll read the contract. But everyone knows that's not true. Human beings are not like that at all. Human beings they just want to, read their Facebook. They just want to, get online. They just want to do what they want to do. And so to present them with these kinds of, to put the responsibility on the user in this way is actually quite unfair. And what privacy law should really be looking at is, actually really restricting the use of cookies to begin with, right? Rather than having us always have to agree to them.
Thanks, research. CDSD is complex dynamic systems theory. And Martin Freeman on language learner agency, dynamic system theory perspective.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, no, I know that Diane Larson Freeman has a lot of really interesting things to say around this and dynamic systems theory. So I'll definitely try to engage with that in my future work. It sounds really, really useful.
And on that note, actually, we will have future seminars by Paul Thibault and
yes, wonderful.
Michael Rolfe did some seminars. And these people, they are also into dynamic echoes, social systems theories. Looks like it's an emerging trend to look. I think Latour is also part of this movement, the predecessor.
Yes.
Latour is being critiqued as a little bit more structuralist than that, as dynamic as people would like him to be. So a lot of exciting things happening. Any further questions from our host? And yes, Bongi, yes.
So I'm just kind of curious because I got to know you from reading some of the some of your piece on discourse analysis, and then for me, my understanding of discourse analysis comes from so-called ethnomethodological traditions or conversation analysis, which is in their saying is very radically emic, participant frame, participants relevance, etc. But what they're looking at is how they are engaging in. They are not reading, they are not drawing on the inferential information. And in my understanding, and I'm just kind of curious. You were heavily emphasizing inferential processes of AI and the importance of ethnography. And how can we draw on some of the existing discourse analytic frameworks and understandings into AI studies?
I would think, well, pragmatics obviously is where, what I talk most about in those papers. But also the ethnography of speaking, I think, is seeing these interactions as speech situations and trying to account for the different actors involved in these speech situations and the different kinds of competencies, rights, responsibilities that these different actors are bringing to these situations. But I think that I think CA is also really, really useful in looking at these kinds of interactions. So looking at the conversation you have with an ATM machine, for example, because whenever I go to a foreign country, when I was living in Hong Kong, whenever I went to Thailand, I always lost my bank card, because the order of the conversation with the ATM was different, right? And I was so used to having this one kind of conversation with this one kind of sequentiality with the ATM machine, that when it was a different conversation, I walked away without my card because I wasn't prompted to take my card in the same way. And so in the same way, we engage with these kinds of dialogue boxes, and they're called dialogue boxes on the computer, right? So a little box will pop up, saying, do you accept the cookies, right? And you click, I accept the cookies. That's a conversation. And to really understanding why we always click I agree, it's probably better not to think about inferences, but to think about CA, to think about sequentiality.
It to me sounds like the conversation is not just a verbal speech, but the way we move, the way we press the buttons,
and you know that's I think that's the way Sachs and Shegloff saw conversation as well. Like they said, conversation is paired action, and so I mean they were most interested in verbal action, but even something like the ringing of a telephone, that's also an action, isn't it? That's responded to. That's a call response kind of thing.
I want to point out, Bongi, there seems to be a misconception. Misconception. CA ethno methodology people, they don't say that we don't talk about inferences. We say that we need to find evidence from the concrete sequentiality analysis to evidence your argument about someone is making such inferences. You cannot just interview someone. You have to look for evidence of their possible inferencing from their action, the sequential action. So it's not that they don't focus on inferencing, okay? Or maybe
in a very different kind of in a different kind of way.
Evidence from the sequentiality of the actions that they are actually making inferences. So it's actually Alan Turing, the Turing machine. You need to look for evidence of the thinking AI from their sequential conversations or actions, right? Evidence of their inferencing.
Yeah.
Any further questions from our host?
Yeah, may I jump into the conversations? And thanks for all the brainstorming about different aspects led by YouTube algorithm. My question will be more from the perspective of parents, because my husband and I interact with lots of local parents, and a lot of them, because of the YouTube trends, the kids imagining they are YouTubers. Sometimes they have the conversation, say, oh, if you like my video, please click the ring bell and then subscribe to my channel. These kind of mindsets are so popular even among primary school kids, because we see very popular cases, and then they try to enjoy video making and have their social media pattern. And even when their parents need to give them some confidence building response, their parents may not talk to them directly, but like their Facebook post or like their message. And the relatives also create social circle communication, not by face-to-face touch. They try to use WhatsApp channel and then interact with emoji stickers. So how would all these landscape be influential to parents and kids, and what would be your suggestions as an educator for parents or for us as teachers to be better prepared to interact with all this? Is it okay to you for the questions? I'm sorry, I speak a lot.
That's fine. I mean, it's I'm not an educational psychologist, and I'm not a child psychologist, but I will say that just in dealing with my students as well, the opportunities for creativity, multimodal creativity around platforms like TikTok and YouTube are quite incredible, actually. And children, when they're engaging with these platforms, are learning sort of semiotic skills that are really important. And so I don't think that they can be seen as a waste of time. I think as well that this kind of augmented reality of digital communication, where, people who are even in the same room might actually be communicating with each other over their mobile phones by liking their thing, is part of modern life. Yeah. And so the question about how to deal with it with your children is certainly relevant. I think the questions you need to think about with your children should not be questions about whether it's good or bad to communicate in this way, or whether they should want to be like YouTube celebrities or micro celebrities or not. I think that's fine. I think the questions that you need to be addressing are questions of attention, trying to understand how digital media are affecting your children's attention, and holding their attention and distracting them sometimes from other things. I think if I were a parent, that would be my biggest challenge. Because it's not that they're doing YouTube, or it's not that they're doing TikTok. It's that they're always doing TikTok, right? And so how do you, and that's because that's the way TikTok is designed. TikTok is designed intentionally it's like a drug, right? It's just to keep giving these kinds of, intermittent rewards to keep people coming back and coming back and coming back. And so I think those are the kinds of issues that you need to think about with children in digital media.
Before we close our session, I want to check my understanding after this section, whether my understanding of the topic is correct. We have always been posthuman, meaning in terms of the pragmatic inferences that we are engaged in, we have always been doing it, or I mean, I'm just checking whether my understanding of the topic is correct.
So it depends on how you think. What do you think posthuman means? Right? So if you think that posthuman means beyond human, AI is taking over, or kind of less than human in a way, then we've never been posthuman. If you think that posthuman means that we are always engaged, entangled in tools and objects and webs of agency, then we've always been posthuman.
So before we close, I'd like to invite everyone from our host to say something to conclude our section. First from Phoebe.
Okay, thank you. Professor Rodney Jones, it's really my honor to meet you in virtual presence today, because I have been attending some of your seminars and then read your publications. Every time when I read your words and also listen to your voice now, I feel impressed, because there's a sense of human touch and also human intelligence, not artificial intelligence for sure. So I hope that we can keep learning from you, and especially listening to your creativity ideas, because I see you use a lot of visual images to tell stories. That's what I really want to learn from you, because storytelling is very complicated, but every time when I get connected to your stories, I feel that I get addicted to it. And thank you very much for your wonderful sharing.
Thank you. That's so kind of you, Phoebe.
Tori? Yes, thanks, Phoebe. Tori, any remarks?
It's great to be able to see you again and hear your talk about posthumanism, and because I've been writing and reading about critical digital literacies, I think your work has been very inspiring, and I like your foundation of mediated discourse analysis. I think that the idea of mediation is key to your idea of, we have never been, or we have always been posthuman. So yeah, thanks for this, and I'll definitely follow your further work on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. And since you're in Hong Kong, I also hope that you get the chance to engage, if you already haven't. I'm sure you probably have, to engage with Ron Darwin over there, because he's also doing some very, very interesting work on critical digital literacies.
Yes, he's at CHK, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Chinese Department of English, yeah, where commonly is, yeah. Thanks, Corey.
Hi, Dr. Jones. I think my greatest takeaway for today is to deepen my understanding of the tension that you talked about the relationship between tool and human. Yes, I think it's a great. I kind of vaguely understand what it is, but now I feel like your explanation using the word tension actually deepens me understanding of this relationship. So thank you so much for the talk today.
Thank you so much. It was really, really nice to meet you, Chinghua.
Thank
Wendy, last but not least.
And thank you again, Dr. Jones. I really love all your works, like from the very 20 years ago of your publications to right now, and it's always an eye opening, and then it was such an exciting moment for me to actually being able to have a chance to ask questions to you that were unclear to me, and then be able to ask, elaborate or ask more, and then how we can draw on some of the implications for our studies too. And also in particular, I really like your discussion about the importance of ethnography, and which looks quite in the AI world, it kind of looks like a black box, but you mentioned about the re-highlighting the importance of ethnography was something that makes me to rethink about the AI as well. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gongyi.
And thank you for the
Really
audience.
nice to meet you as well.
Thanks so much. It must be so late, your time. Yeah. So,
That's okay. It's okay.
so
Yeah.
until next time, we will invite you back.
Yes, please do invite me back. Angel, you have such a wonderful group of students and people in this network. I would really like to come back in any capacity, just to be an audience for a talk, as well as to talk again. So please do keep me informed of the future activities.
Yeah, because I think the next most contentious intellectual debate would be the whole notion of mediation itself is being challenged by the complex dynamic system theories. And it will be a very fruitful debate because we need to have that kind of intellectual debate.
Absolutely.
When we talk about mediation in complex systems theories, what role does mediation? Because now the focus is not on the agent with a tool, but the focus is on the complex, evolving, co-evolving systems within systems within systems within systems. So what place do we give to mediation, which Ron and Susie's Scollon's work is so much grounded in the Vygotskian, which is very much the Marxism, the agent, the subject, the object, the tool, the mediation, that kind of philosophical orientation, that posthumanism, and I would classify complex systems theories as part of the posthumanism movement, which is challenging that Marxist philosophical assumption of subject, object, tool, and mediation. So this will be such an exciting intellectual debate, and I might invite you back to dialogue with those complex systems researchers.
That would be great.
Once again, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's really nice to meet all of you.
Yeah,
have a nice day wherever you are in the world.
Keep well.
Thank you.
Keep well. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.